Alright, yeah, welcome back to some more Magic Duels. This week we're going to be taking a look at a mono red burn deck. So, since the new Armaket set got released, there actually was a number of new cards that made me think that mono red burn was actually viable as an archetype. Before we had to use black cards like Arms of the Vein to kind of supplement the lack of burn spells, but I think we finally have enough to make a decent aggressive deck in mono colours. So, let's have a look at the deck, shall we? So, Mono Red Burn is pretty self-explanatory for the most part. It's going to be quite a quick deck tech, I would imagine. The whole thing revolves around spells that point damage at your opponent, and we're going to use some really good value creatures here and there to kind of supplement the lack of really good value burn spells anyway. So, we've got, right at the very beginning, a Bomat Courier. So one of the things that Mono Red Burn really struggles with, like most aggro decks, is running out of cards, and Bomat Courier allows you to get that early game aggression, but also refill your hand at the late game. So for one colourless mana, you get a 1/1 artifact creature with haste, which means it can attack the turn it comes out, which means right on turn 1 you're getting some damage in. When it attacks as well, you get to exile the top card of your library, and what you can do with all of those exiled cards is pay 1, discard your entire hand, which by the time you want to be doing this, your hand is either full of Fiery Tempers, which you can Madness off, or it's empty and you're going to be taking all of the cards from underneath Bomat Courier. So you pay a red, discard your hand, sacrifice the creature, you put all of the cards that you've got with Bomat Courier up to that point into your hand, and that becomes your new hand essentially. So if we get to about turn 5, Bomat Courier's got 5 cards under it, we pay a 1 red, we discard probably 1 card from our hand at that point, and we draw 5, which is a complete refill for us as far as we're concerned. And considering most of the cards we're going to be using up to that point and throwing away our burn spells, we'll be drawing into more of them, so it's really good value on the Bomat Courier. Next we've got Lightning Axe. So for 1 red, instant speed. This is in here for the creatures that most burn cards cannot hit, but it's also here as a discard outlet for Fiery Temper as well. So for 1 red mana, instant speed. There's an additional cost to cast Lightning Axe. You can either discard a card or pay 5. So it can be a 6 mana spell to deal 5 damage to target creature, which gets rid of most creatures in the format, some things that Shock can't do, for example, and some later game burn spells, maybe even Exquisite Firecraft with the 4 power might not be good enough. Lightning Axe is there to be able to do that. So as far as turn 1's concerned, you could discard a card as well if we want to get our hand empty for Hazrat as well, who gets value out of essentially you being Hellbent. I can't remember what the name of having 1 card in hand is. They've made a new term for it, but Hellbent's having no cards in hand, and then there's something else I can't remember. But yes, we benefit from having few cards in hand, but we also have ways of fueling up our hand. We also have some things that benefit from being discarded as well, like Fiery Temper. That has a Madness cost, so if we discard the card, we can actually cast it for its Madness cost instead, which means that it's much cheaper to discard it than actually just to cast it. So a Lightning Axe discarding a Fiery Temper can be 3 damage to an opponent, 5 damage to a creature, that kind of thing for 2 mana, which is really good value. Next we've got Shock. So for 1 red mana, instant speed, Shock deals 2 damage to target creature or player. So it's burn to be pointed at our opponent, but also burn to be pointed at early game creatures as well if we're against an aggressive deck. We do struggle a little bit with heavy creature based decks, things like White Weenie and stuff like that, so Shock does actually help with that. The alternative is Magma Spray as well, but since it doesn't hit players, I wasn't particularly happy with it. I don't think it was necessarily a better pick to have a Magma Spray, since we can't point it at players, which means we also can't point it at Planeswalkers either. And, you know, eventually this 2 damage won't hit most creatures, and we probably want to be firing these kind of spells off at our opponent's face. Next we've got Blood Rage Brawler. So for 2 mana, it is a 4/3, which is insane value, but it does have a downside, which we can take advantage of. Blood Rage Brawler enters the battlefield, you have to discard a card. So it allows us to get empty-handed for Hazrat, so that we can start attacking in with her. We can also use it to discard Fiery Tempers as well and Madness them. If we're a little bit flooded, we can discard lands, and if we've got no cards in hand at all, then it is literally just a 2 mana 4/3, which is awesome. But that's really good value for a creature. It's a little bit harder to deal with than most creatures as well, so it's pretty nice value, and the discard isn't much of a problem for us. Next we've got Thermo Alchemist. We're running 4 copies of this dude because this dude means that burn does a lot more for you. So for 1 and a red, we've got a 0/3 creature with Defender, which means it can't attack. However, we don't want to be attacking with it. 1, because it's got 0 power, but also because we want to be tapping it instead. So we can tap it to deal 1 damage to each opponent. So we tap it, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you get to untap it so that you can tap it again. So every single shock now becomes a 3 damage spell. Your lightning, not your lightning, your fiery tempers are now 4 damage spells, that kind of thing. And if you can chain them together, we're dealing a lot of damage. You can also Thermal Alchemist on their end step every single turn, so most of the time for the 2 mana you're getting absolutely insane value from your Thermal Alchemist, and the more you have, the better it is. We then have Harness Lightning, so for 1 and a red, instant speed, choose target creature, you get 3 energy, and then you may pay any amount of energy, and Harness Lightning deals that much damage to that creature. So on its own, it's a 3 damage burn spell to a creature for 2 mana, which is pretty good. It deals with a lot of stuff. But what we can also do is maybe not pay all of that energy, and that allows us to pay for Lathanu Hellion's upkeep cost, for example. We can also generate energy with the Dynavolt Tower as well, so we can make it more than 3 potentially. We can also use it to generate energy for the Dynavolt Tower to ping our opponent for 3 as well. And we even have Ether Hubs as well, so once we've paid the energy for that, we can re-engage it with our Harness Lightnings, which is pretty good. Next we've got Chandra, Fire of Kaladesh. So for 1 and 2 red, we have a 2/2 legendary creature. Chandra is essentially the same as Thermal Alchemist, except for when she taps and you want to untap her, she triggers off of red spells instead of instants and sorceries. So she actually triggers a lot more often than the Thermal Alchemists would. But when she taps, she deals 1 damage to target player. If Chandra has dealt 3 or more damage this turn, you get to exile her and bring her back as Chandra. We'll get to that in a second, but I wanted to go into a little bit more detail about this. So, with Chandra, this tap ability is the thing that transforms her. So, the last thing we need to do with Chandra is tap her to deal that 1 damage. And by doing that, it's how we flip the Planeswalker. So, there's a few things we could do. If our opponent has no creatures on the board, we can attack for 2. We can play any spell we want to untap her, and then when we tap her, that's the 3rd damage, and she transforms. Alternatively, we can tap her for the 1. We can play Insult, which means that damage can't be prevented, and if it would deal damage, if a source would deal damage, it deals double. So we tap it for 1. We play Insult, which untaps Chandra. Insult resolves, and any spell is doubled, so Chandra's tap actually deals 2 damage, which is the 3rd that we need to transform her. So there's a lot of synergies with Chandra. Easy to flip her in this deck as well, which is awesome. Because if you do flip her, and you're using the Insult strategy, when she flips and you get to +1, Chandra's +1 will actually deal 4 damage to target player, or 4 damage to target creature if you use her -2, which is awesome. So she's got a lot of burn potential here as well. Her -7, which I've pulled off a few times, mostly during Origins season, because you don't see too much play these days, but in burn she's really at home. So for -7, Chandra Roaring Flame deals 6 damage to each opponent, and each player dealt damage this way gets an emblem with, at the beginning of your upkeep, this emblem deals 3 damage to you. So we could actually even Insult when we want to ultimate, and it'll deal 12 damage to each opponent, which is probably going to kill them. We're playing burn, so I'm pretty sure we can make 8 damage up by the time that Chandra ultimates. But yeah, there's a lot of awesomeness with Chandra there. She's essentially just an extra Thermal Alchemist, which is also nothing too bad at all. We then have Lathanu Helion. We briefly touched upon you, but only in the negative sense. So for 2 and a red, we have a 4/4 creature with haste, which is awesome. Great value. When it enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy. Awesome. However, at the beginning of your end step, you have to sacrifice it unless you pay 2 energy. So the energy that it enters with, you have to pay to keep it around. Maximum potential just on its own of damage dealt is 8. 8 for 3 mana is pretty good. We also have ways of keeping it around. As we mentioned, we've got Harness Lightning, so if we used Harness Lightning and only paid 1, we can use the other 2 energy from the Harness Lightning in order to keep it around. Also, with the Dynavolt Towers, whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, we get 2 energy. Yet again, we could maybe just use a shock, generate the 2 energy, and that'll allow us to keep the Hellion around for some really good value. It's pretty awesome. I'd run more if we had the option. Next we've got Dynavolt Tower. So for 3 mana we've got ourselves an artifact. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell you get 2 energy. And you get to pay 5 energy to deal 3 damage to target creature or player. So for 5 energy you essentially use a lightning bolt or a fiery temper in this case. Which isn't too difficult to pull off. It essentially means that all of our spells are now dealing a little bit more damage. Or they're at least adding to the damage as far as Dynavolt Tower is concerned. So it's pretty sweet. And we get to keep Lathnu Hellion around, and that energy dealt as well can also power up Harness Lightnings and our Ether Hubs as well to generate coloured mana again. Really awesome. Not seen too much play with the Dynavolt Tower though, because we do have a lot of 3-drops in this deck, as you can tell. So quite a lot of the times we end up spending our times actually using like Hungry Flames and Fiery Tempers and stuff like that. But if you do get a Dynavolt Tower down onto the board, some really good value to be had there. So next we've got Hungry Flames. So for 2 and a red instant speed, Hungry Flames deals 3 damage to target creature and 2 damage to target player. So the only way we can cast this is by our opponent having a creature, but if they do, then we get to point 2 at our opponent as well. It's a really good spell because we don't really want to be spending too much time killing our opponent's creatures over pointing at their face, but Hungry Flames allows us to do both, so it's really good value there. Something like the Lightning Axe, for example, could be an occasion where a shock might be better because we want to point it at our opponent, whereas Lightning Axe only points it at a creature. Wanted to really make sure that any burn we were running was very much focused on pointing at our opponent first and foremost. There are of course the exceptions with Lightning Axe, which actually help us point Fiery Tempers at our opponent. That kind of thing. But it felt really important as a burn deck to make sure that every single spell could be pointed at our opponent if it came to it. So Hungry Flames is really awesome for that as creature removal. So we have our Fiery Tempers. We have spoken about this, so I won't touch upon it too much, but it is 2 for 3 mana, 1 and 2 red for an instant speed that deals 3 damage to a target creature or player, and we can Madness it for 1, so if we discard it we can pay 1 instead. Really awesome. Loads of synergies with our deck there for discarding. We then have Exquisite Firecraft, so for 1 and 2 red sorcery speed, Exquisite Firecraft deals 4 damage to target creature or player. Then it also has Spell Mastery, which says if you have 2 or more instants and sorcery cards in your graveyard, then it cannot be countered, which is really good against control decks. So if we've been really hyper aggressive and we've got our opponent down to that 4 life total, maybe they're finally holding up their counters to stop us pointing Fiery Tempers at them, which might kill them. But we draw into a Firecraft. By that point, we've easily got Spell Mastery online and it's uncounterable, which means a control deck is easily going to go down. This can also be used to kill Planeswalkers as well against control matchups like that. So there is some awesome value there. They really need to play around our spells if they think we've got a Firecraft in hand. Next we've got Collective Defiance, so for 1 and 2 red, sorcery speed. It has Escalate, but we'll get to that in a moment. We get to choose 1 mode or more, essentially. The Escalate is for 1, so for every mode we choose beyond the first, we pay an extra 1 mana as well. So there are 3 options we can choose from. We get to give target player discards all the cards in his or her hand and draws that many cards. So if our opponent's tutored for something and we don't want them to have it, we can make them discard their hand, for example. We can also point this at ourselves if we have all lands in hand, or maybe we've got a handful of Fiery Tempers and we want to Madness them off. We can take advantage of that. So we can also point 4 damage at a creature and 3 damage to target opponent as well. So that could be used to kill a big creature, kill a planeswalker, or kill a creature, kill or hit our opponent. And we can pay 1 extra for each of those modes that we choose. So we could do all 3 if we want, for an extra 2 mana on top of the 3 that we're already paying. Next we've got Hazrat the Servant. So for 3 and a red, we've got a 5/4 indestructible haste legendary creature god, which is pretty awesome. Hazrat the Servant cannot attack or block, however, unless you have 1 or fewer cards in hand. It's really easy to get low on cards in this deck, which is usually a downside, but with Hazrat we can make it an upside. We can also keep into that, we can stay in that point as well by using her ability, which says 2 and a red, discard a card. Hazrat deals 2 damage to each opponent. So we can turn our lands into burn spells for 3 mana. For 4 mana, we can actually discard Fiery Tempers and Madness them off, and that will be for 5 damage, which is pretty awesome. And if we just want to make sure that we can attack and block with her, then we can discard whatever we've got in hand as well to do that. maybe we actually want Injury on the other side and don't want to cast Insult, we can discard this into our graveyard and use its Aftermath, that kind of thing. We then have Chandra, Torch of Defiance. So for 2 and 2 red, we've got ourselves another Chandra Planeswalker. Should be noted that there is a Planeswalker rule. You can only have one Chandra on the board at a time. So if you have flipped your baby Chandra and she's now a Planeswalker, do not play this Chandra. But if she's the only one on the board, on your side at least, then it's all fine to play her. So, for 4 mana, you get a 4 loyalty Planeswalker. The first +1 ability allows you to exile the top card of your library. You may cast that card, and if you choose not to, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. So, the top ability is essentially card advantage. If it hits lands, it deals 2 damage to an opponent. If it hits a castable spell, you can cast away and choose not to deal the 2 damage. So, for example, if we plus and it's a shock, we might as well cast the shock just to get an instant in our graveyard. If it's maybe an Exquisite Firecraft, we want to be casting that because it deals an extra bit of damage as opposed to not casting it. We might be a little bit short on mana perhaps though, and we get to take half of it with the rejecting of the cast, as it were. But there's many options. If we have plenty of cards in hand but we just don't have the mana, maybe we play Chandra on turn 4. We can actually +1, add 2 mana to our mana pool, and essentially making a cost 2 mana for a 5 loyalty Planeswalker at that point. And we can spend the 2 mana on whatever we want. So Harness Lightning's maybe putting down a blocker for the Alchemist, maybe a Blood Rage Brawler, that kind of thing. We can be really efficient with our mana with Chandra, which is awesome. She can also come down and protect herself all by herself. So for -3, deals 4 damage to target creature. That will take her down to a 1, which does put her in burn range. And pretty much removal for any creature that comes along, so Thopter could take her out at that point. So it is a little bit risky, but if you're fairly confident that you can keep her alive if you kill the one creature, then that option's available as well. Kills nice Kalatases and things like that. All of your life gain creatures, you want to get them off the board as soon as possible, because the worst thing for this deck is your opponent gaining life, so you want to make sure that's not happening. Get rid of any lifelink creatures before it's too late. But we also have a -7 ability, and it's not too bad, not too hard either to ultimate with her as well. You get an emblem with, whenever you cast a spell, this emblem deals 5 damage to target creature or player. Fairly self-explanatory. Shocks now deal 5 damage, in addition to what they're already doing, so that's 7 damage total. Any spell we cast is now going to deal 5 damage, so if your opponent hasn't been gaining life, they're dead in 4 turns if you haven't touched them up to this point, which is probably not going to be the case, but yeah, it's a couple of turns, a couple of cards, and they're probably dead, which is awesome. Finally, we've got Insult to Injury. So this is one of the cards that made me think that Mono Red Burn is now possibly a thing. So Insult is for 2 and a red, sorcery speed. Damage cannot be prevented this turn. If a source you control would deal damage this turn, it deals double that damage instead. So Chandra's Plus now deals 4 damage. Hazrat's Discard now deals 4 damage. Exquisite Firecraft now deals 8 damage, and you can see the point that I'm making here. When it goes into the graveyard as well, you get Injury available to cast. So this has Aftermath, which means it can only be cast from your graveyard. So for 3 mana you can cast it whenever you want from your graveyard, which is essentially like an extra card in a nutshell. And it's like a Hungry Flames, but a little bit weaker. Deals 2 damage to target creature and 2 damage to target player. If you cast both Insult and Injury on the same turn, essentially 6 mana, that's 4 damage to target creature and 4 damage to target player. So it's really good value for that as well. But we can really use Insult to close out a game. So a Thermo Alchemist with an Insult will deal 2 damage each spell we cast, that kind of thing. Really awesome. Onto the mana base, it's pretty simplistic. We've got 19 mountains because we are heavy into red, and we have a lot of doubles as well. We don't want to be running too many colourless cards. Too many colourless lands, should I say, which is why we're only running 1 Gyreach Sanitarium. And we're only running this mostly as a looter for the Fiery Tempers, and I don't think running 2 is entirely necessary, since this is the only thing we really want to be discarding. But it does come a point where you end up drawing too many mountains, and we can maybe use the secondary ability in order to loot away those lands and find extra burn. And it also adds colourless to your mana pool as well, so it's not too bad. Finally, we've got Ether Hubs as well. When it enters the battlefield, you get 1 energy. We can use that on our Harness Lightning so that we can deal 4 damage, but that will mean that our Ether Hubs will turn into colourless lands, because we have to pay energy in order to generate coloured mana on these Ether Hubs. But the extra energy is really useful for the Harness Lightnings in the early game if you really need to get rid of something like a Kalatas or something like that. You need that 4 toughness ability to destroy, so an Ether Hub's pretty decent. And we do have ways of generating energy back to turn them back into coloured lands, and also we don't have to use all of Harness Lightning's energy either, so we can keep Ether Hub online for quite some time. Anyway guys, that's going to do it for the deck tech. I do hope you enjoyed, and if you did, be sure to like and subscribe for some more. Don't forget to check out the matches as well, that should be already out as well, and hit that little bell icon right next to the subscription button, and that will give you notifications when I release new videos. I do hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.